Some people already got reparations. White people. White enslavers were paid for losing their human property. The actual people who were raped, tortured, whipped, and sold, and worse, were promised land to get a fresh start after the war, but they got nothing.
I can't be racist. I have black friends. Sure, you probably don't see black people as objects, but you're refusing to accept the role our people have had in their oppression. That guilt we feel is our responsibility for the actions of our ancestors. It's why white people refuse to say that black people deserve reparation, because it admits our guilt.
When white people in the United States balk at the idea of paying reparations to black Americans who descended from slaves, they disagree with the Bible. As a Christian, I believe that reparations are not only a matter of justice and equity, but also a reflection of God's character and values. In the Bible, we see numerous examples of God's concern for the oppressed, the marginalized, and the downtrodden.
Wagwan family, with the awakening of black people that is happening, we are starting to have conversation about a lot of things. And one of the things we are talking about as black people, it is reparation. Every time the word reparation is mentioned, many white people immediately get defensive, okay? And you may see their faces change, their tone changes, and their excuses come rushing out. Okay, they say things like, that was long time ago, or they will say things like, I never owned slaves, so why should I pay? Okay, but family, let me tell you some truth here. Reparations are not clarity, or reparations are not charity, okay? It is not charity. It's not about charity. They are not about begging, and they are not about handouts, okay? Reparations are debt, a debt that is centuries overdue, okay? Now, it's a debt for owing slavery, okay? It's a debt for colonization. It's a debt for apartheid. It's a debt for Jim Crow. It's a debt for redlining, mass incarceration, name it. And every time the system has stolen from us and built wealth from us, that's a debt to us. So this conversation matters at all, because it is not just about money. It's about justice. It's about dignity. It's about restoration, okay? And the future of our children. It's not about repairing what has been deliberately broken, okay? It's about repairing that. So in today's video, I'm gonna play some clips here of white people, what they are talking about reparation. And after hearing from them, we'll come back here and talk about this.
Owned anyone. My neighbors, as far as I know, have never been owned by anyone. But the people who say we don't owe any reparations for the Civil War are ignoring something really huge. Or maybe they just don't know. Some people already got reparations. White people. White enslavers were paid for losing their human property. The actual people who were raped, tortured, whipped, and sold, and worse, were promised land to get a fresh start after the war, but they got nothing. When slavery was abolished, Congress paid nearly $1 million, which is 30 million in today's bucks, to white enslavers as compensation for losing their property in a war they lost. If a freed person didn't hit the road fast enough, they risked being re-enslaved under new laws that were just workarounds for all these white people losing their slaves. After the Civil War ended, Union General Sherman set aside 400,000 acres of confiscated Confederate land for black families to start new lives on, up to 40 acres each. The Army loaned out mules to help them work the land. That's where the phrase 40 acres and a mule comes from. Black people were already working some of this land when Lincoln was assassinated and Andrew Johnson became president. Well, Johnson reversed the order. He gave the land back to the same Confederates who had just tried to destroy the country. The freed people were evicted. So they made all these things into crimes that were non-crimes. They were things like, if a black person didn't have a job, that was a crime. If a black person couldn't prove that they had a job, that was a crime. You could get arrested for that and a lot of other ridiculous things. But once you were in jail, you could be leased out as labor for private profit. This system of convict leasing allowed white landowners and businesses to replace slavery with something just as violent, just as profitable as slavery. No wonder there are still Confederate flags all across the South. Even after slavery was abolished, Black Americans were not safe. Public lynchings became a regular threat. They were a form of terror used to keep free people in their place. They were planned events announced in advance so everybody could attend. They were held in broad daylight. White families brought their children to watch Black people being hanged, tortured, brutally murdered. It was a festival. People sold food. There were postcards made. People could buy postcards of the mutilated bodies hanging from trees and mail them in the mail or keep them as souvenirs. This country took care of Civil War criminals and punished the ones the war was supposed to free. And there was a lot more abuse I just can't fit into this video. Next time I'm going to talk about the stuff that happened in relation to the Great Depression and World War II. And then after that, I'll have one on civil rights, the era when I was growing up, how it all ties in to the racism that is part and parcel of our grand land today. White people, you especially need to get curious. Join me in this research, and you'll find that people are willing and able to come in with their education and their experience to help you learn. You just have to be open to it. We need to be willing to be uncomfortable.
When white people in the United States balk at the idea of paying reparations to Black Americans who descended from slaves, they disagree with the Bible. Reparations are a form of compensation or restitution made to those who have suffered injustice, particularly those in cases of racial inequality, discrimination, and slavery. The idea of paying reparations to Black Americans is not a new one. It has been a topic of discussion for decades, if not centuries. However, it has gained renewed attention and support in recent years, following the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement and the growing recognition of systemic racism in American society. As a Christian, I believe that reparations are not only a matter of justice and equity, but also a reflection of God's character and values. In the Bible, we see numerous examples of God's concern for the oppressed, the marginalized, and the downtrodden. From the Israelites' liberation from slavery in Egypt to the ministry of Jesus among the poor and the outcast, we see a consistent theme of God's love for those who are on the margins of society. One of the key biblical principles that underlie the idea of reparations is the concept of restitution. In the book of Leviticus, we see God commanding the Israelites to make restitution to those whom they have wronged. Leviticus 6:1-5 says, "If anyone sins and commits a breach of faith against the Lord by deceiving his neighbor in a matter of deposit or security or through robbery, or if he has oppressed his neighbor or has found something lost and lied about it, swearing falsely in any of all the things that people do and sin thereby, if he has sinned and has realized his guilt and will restore what he took by robbery when he got it by oppression or deposit that was committed to him, or the lost thing that he found, or anything about which he has sworn falsely, he shall restore in full and shall add a fifth to it, and give it to him to whom it belongs on the day that he realizes his guilt." This passage emphasizes the importance of making restitution to those who have been wronged, and not just restoring what was taken, but adding to it as a form of compensation. This principle of restitution can be applied to the issue of reparations to Black Americans who have suffered centuries of enslavement, discrimination, and systemic oppression. Another biblical principle that supports the idea of reparations is the concept of Jubilee. In Leviticus 25, God commands the Israelites to observe a Jubilee every 50th year, during which all debts are forgiven, all slaves to be set free, and all property to be returned to its original owners. This was a radical idea of economic justice designed to prevent the accumulation of wealth and power in the hands of a few and to ensure that all members of society had equal access to resources and opportunities. The idea of Jubilee can be seen as a model for reparations in that it seeks to address the root causes of inequality and oppression rather than just treating the symptoms. By forgiving debts, freeing slaves, and returning property, Jubilee seeks to create a more just and equitable society, one in which everyone has the opportunity to flourish. As a Christian, I believe paying reparations to Black Americans is only a matter of justice and equity, but also it is a reflection of God's values and character. Through the biblical principles of restitution and jubilee, we see a model for how we can address the historical and systemic injustices that have plagued our society for far too long. While the issue of reparations is complex and contentious, I believe that as Christians, we have a responsibility to seek justice.
White people throughout American history are almost always seen on the side of the oppressors. Not all white people, but most of us. And this sucks to learn. It's even harder to internalize. And it's why white people usually don't accept this, because it makes us feel a deep sense of guilt. I think it's why white people say nonsense like, I can't be racist, I have black friends. Sure, you probably don't see black people as objects, but you're refusing to accept the role our people have had in their oppression. That guilt we feel is our responsibility for the actions of our ancestors. It's why white people refuse to say that black people deserve reparation, because it admits our guilt. But black people deserve reparations. It just makes sense logically. You can sue someone for scratching your car, but black people can't sue the American government for the enslavement of their people. My people are arresting and deporting Mexican families from this country. Think about that. We are telling people that they are not allowed on the land we stole. Let's go a step further. White people stole a sacred land site from the people indigenous to this land and then carved 4 white people's faces on it, most of which were slave owners. I mean, Mount Rushmore is a place that we look at and we're like, oh, cool, giant faces. But to other people, it's a giant form of oppression. And admitting that and coming to terms with that sucks. We suck, dude. My people really and truly suck. Not all of us contributed to this oppression, but we are all a part of it. And this will mostly sound like virtue signaling. It will mostly sound like, look at how rough we are. But there is a reality to admitting this guilt and being honest with it. Because white people are afraid to do this. And we're afraid to admit it because my people are weak. White people are weak. We have power we have given ourselves and put down the cultures that are stronger than us because we know that we're weak. If white Americans were oppressed the same way black, native, or Mexican American people are, we would crack like glass. Our culture and identity as white people is so meaningless that we do everything in our power to keep other people down so that we don't break from having someone else on top. I think that's why you see white Americans championing white pride, not just out of ignorance or racism, but it's because they are scared. They're scared to come to terms with their guilt, scared to admit they're wrong, and terrified to acknowledge that we may have all the societal, economic, and political power, but as a people we are weak. But this isn't the way it has to be forever. I have hope that one day my people will finally take responsibility for what we have done. I hope that we'll collectively accept our role in the oppression of our non-white brothers and sisters and finally take action. And it will take the action of us white folks. It's not just non-white people that have to fight for their rights. It's us too fighting for them because our cross to bear is being born white. Being born with the skin color of the oppressors means that we have to fight to be nothing like them. We're not near that right now. America is in a tumultuous stage where it very much does not feel like white people are acknowledging where they went wrong. But I want to have hope, and I refuse to accept that one day justice won't prevail. Collectively, we can all shed the shadow of oppression and share this place together. And that's the message I want to end with. I want to be hopeful that one day oppression will be something taught in history class, something that we don't have to see ourselves in. That's what I hope. Anyway, I want to be optimistic in the end. Anyway, that's it. Thanks.
I've never.
For example, the United States government and European powers committed crime against humanity, and it was crimes that lasted for centuries, crimes that enriched nations. Okay, nations or empires were built and established global power, and those crimes were never repaid. Instead, they were just buried under lies. Okay, excuses, buried under historical distortion. Now, let me mention this. After the Holocaust, Germany paid reparations to Jewish survivors and to the state of Israel. After World War II, Japanese Americans who were placed in internment camps in the USA received reparations. Even Native Americans, though they have not they have not received massively, but they received land settlements and financial agreements. So the procedure is clear. Reparations are recognized by government when crime as a colonization or slavery is committed. Okay, but yet when it comes to black people, the people whose labor was stolen, the people whose lands was stolen bodies and stolen resources, when it comes to us, suddenly the conversation changes suddenly, and it may be too complicated, maybe too long ago, suddenly it's not possible. Okay, but the truth is reparation is possible. It is odd and it is overdue. Now, for centuries, white supremacy has survived on a myth. The myth that white people are naturally superior, okay? The myth that white people are more hardworking. The myth that white people are more intelligent, more deserving. The myth that justify slavery, okay? And it justifies colonization, it justifies segregation, it justifies every act of oppression. Now, reparation threatens that myth, because if reparations are paid, it means admitting that their wealth was not earned through hard work. It means their wealth was stolen. It means that admitting that the skyscrapers, the banks, the corporations, universities, and the global trade system were built on the back of black people is agreeing. It means admitting that the comfort of privilege many white families enjoy today is directly tied to the suffering of our ancestors. Okay? So admitting reparation means destroying the myth of innocence. It means facing the mirror of history and realizing that the success of the West is built on genocide, theft, and slavery, and many simply cannot handle that truth. And that's why DJT is trying so hard to whitewash the history, trying so hard to delete the ugly side of the white history. We all know that the white history is about stealing, genocide, and but they are trying to whitewash that to make sure that there's no bad thing on their back or on their, Now, right now, the racial wealth gap in America is staggering, okay? According to the data, the average white family has nearly 10 times the wealth of the average black family. And this is not an accident. This is a legacy of slavery. It's a legacy of Jim Crow and redlining. Exclusion from wealth building programs like the GI Bill and ongoing systematic racism. So if reparation were paid, that wealth gap would begin to close, okay? And closing that gap means redistributing power. Because wealth is not just about money, it's about influence, land ownership, okay? Business creation and independence. So reparation would mean black people no longer being forced into permanent second-class citizenship. Reparation would mean black families having the same opportunities to build generational wealth as white families, okay? And that is the fear that is there. Some white people don't fear losing money. They fear losing dominance, okay? Reparation would level the playing field. And in this system that has only functioned with black people on the bottom, it will mean leveling that up. Okay? And leveling that field, it feels like threat. So every time reparation is mentioned, we hear some excuses. We hear the same recycled excuses. Number one, they will say slavery was long time ago, that nobody is alive today on slaves. But let me tell you, slavery did not end. Okay? And that is the most common excuse, but it ignores that the consequences of slavery are alive today. Generational wealth on white families was passed down. Okay? White generational poverty was forced on black families. You hear me? White universities, banks, and corporations built fortunes during slavery. And many of them, until today, is still existing. The crime didn't end. It just evolved. I'm sorry for the light. I'm shooting this video, so I'm sorry for that. Okay? Another excuse is that I am poor. I'm a poor white person. I did not benefit from slavery. Okay? And even poor white people benefited from the system of whiteness. They may not be billionaires, but their whiteness shielded them from the systematic oppression that crushed black communities. So they got access to schools, jobs, and neighborhoods that were denied to black people. Okay? They will say things like, it is too complicated to figure out how much is to be paid. But that's a lie. The US government tracks everything when it comes to taxes, everything when it comes to loans and military budgets. So if they can track every dollar in those systems, then they can track what was stolen from us. It's just they don't want to track. It is not too much. It can be traced. Okay? Now, I'll say this. Slavery never ended. It just evolved. Okay? The 13th Amendment of the US Constitution says slavery is abolished except as punishment for a crime. Okay? Black people, who are 13% of the US population, make up nearly to 40% of the prison population. Why? Because the system criminalizes us every time. Okay? The war on drugs targeted black communities. Stop and frisk targeted black communities. Police brutality and biased sentencing keep on locking black people in cages. Okay? Prison today are run for profit. Companies use prisons labor to produce goods. And who are there in the prisons are black people. So they are exploiting the people. And just like slavery, it generates wealth for corporation and government while exploiting black labor. So when people say reparations aren't necessary, ask them, why is slavery still legal in prisons today? Okay? Reparations are not about the past. They are about the present system that continues to function on stolen labor. And it's something I call psychological guilty. Okay? Some white people resist reparation because they fear guilty. They don't want to feel responsible for crimes they didn't, personally commit. But here's the truth. Reparations are not about individual guilt. They are about collective responsibility. Okay? White people today may not have enslaved anyone, but they benefit from a system that was built on enslavement. Okay? The wealth, the neighborhoods, the schools, the institution, okay? They inherited all of them. Instead of guilty, you are just require an accountability. We require accountability. But accountability is uncomfortable because it requires honesty. And honesty destroys the myth of innocence. And that is why denial is easier for many white people than the truth. Okay? I think reparations, most of the white systems, are not agreeing to this, because when they are agreeing to this, is agreeing to that this you did to the people, you did to the black people, and you need to pay for them, because you cannot pay what you did not do. So by agreeing to pay reparations, it's agreeing to the mistakes. And that will expose the lies of white America, that the empire was built on what? On backs of black people, on lies. So that's what they don't want. That's what they don't want to put out there. Reparations are not impossible, in fact. They have already happened in smaller forms. Japanese Americans received around $20,000 each. Holocaust survivors received billions from Germany. Native Americans received land settlements. So it is not hard. But why is this conversation going round and round? It's because they don't want to admit the lie. They don't want to admit that America was built on the back of black people. But at the end of the day, we as black people, we are not begging. This is our rights. These are debts that needs to pay to us, okay? And that's why in Caribbean, they even protest about this, okay? Now, let me just hear what you have to say on the comment section, because I'm sorry for recording this video. There's no light, but I'm outside, but I cannot end a day without talking to you. Tell me what you think. Until next episode, peace out.